Welcome back to Jay All Day, everyone. This is an MMA Business Hour episode. So earlier in the week, I put out this short about how the UFC no longer needs Dana White, and people lost their goddamn minds. The UFC no longer needs Dana White. And in fact, I think Dana is a liability to the company moving forward. But what a lot of people weren't getting about what I was trying to say was they're looking at the past. I'm trying to look forward. And in this video that I did last week, I did a big video about this topic and how the UFC no longer needs Dana White. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the whole video. I'm going to go over various topics looking at the future of the UFC. And you can decide if I'm absolutely crazy, I'm an asshole, or whatever you want to think about me. Because I do know that I'm looking at this from an objective manner. I don't have some gripe against Dana White. I'm just looking at the UFC and where they're going moving forward. Through this video, I want you to decide whether Dana White is a hindrance to the company moving forward, or do you think he's going to make and grow the UFC better than it's been the last 10 years? Let's check it out. Welcome back to Jay All Day, everyone. I have a great MMA business hour for you guys today. I want to talk about how the UFC no longer needs Dana White. And in fact, I think Dana is a liability to the company moving forward. Let's talk about it. There's no questioning that Dana White is one of the best entrepreneurs in the last 25 years in the United States. There's no debating it at all. He has done such an amazing job growing the brand to where it is right now. I just think at this particular point in his life, he's a hindrance to the company. Between like the failing of Power Slap, the domestic violence issues, and he's starting to even lose fighters. If you look back in the last 5-10 years, I mean, the Ultimate Fighter is a failure. Not even Conor McGregor could save it. And women's MMA is at the worst it's ever been. After Ronda Rousey got the break speed offer by Holly Holm and Amanda Nunes, and now that Nunes is also retired, there are no women UFC fighters currently on the roster that could headline a pay-per-view and sell over 300,000 or 400,000 pay-per-view buys. I think a lot of Dana White's recent failures have a lot to do with his ego. The Francis Ngannou situation was definitely his ego. The same thing goes with Power Slap. He tried jamming it down UFC fans' throat, and now they're at the point where they're having to pretty much give it away. He's like, the views are so high. It doesn't bring you dollars into your business to sustain this Power Slap league between promoting it and putting the shows on and paying these fighters, even though they get paid like shit. But still, it's just like, how many times do you have to fail before you just pull the plug and move on? And sometimes you got to just cut your losses and move on to the next thing. And knowing when to cut your losses is what a true leader really does. And Dana White's ego is way too big. It's too bloated for him to compromise on anything. In fighter pay, the Francis Ngannou situation, healthcare. I mean, there's all these things, and the fighters unionizing. He's going to fight these things and fight these things and fight these things. Fighters are going to get sick of Dana White's inability to compromise at all whatsoever. The starting salary for most UFC fighters is like 12 and 12, guys. So even if you fight 3 times in a year and you win all of your fights, that's 72 grand. And then between paying 10% to your management, 10% to your coaches, and taxes, you're left with like $38,000. Who can live off of $38,000? Nobody can live off of $38,000. To be a professional fighter and have to live off of $38,000 a year being signed in the UFC is disgraceful. The next thing I want to talk about is the lawsuit. It just got thrown out of the appeals court, and there's a court date set for April. Up to 1,250 fighters can file charges in this class action lawsuit against the UFC, and it's like up to like $1.6 billion in damages. Another thing I want to talk about is the 50K bonus. It's been a 50K bonus for like 20 years, dude. That 50K becomes 30K after you pay your taxes, state and federal, and then you got to pay your coaches, and then you got to pay a nutritionist, and then you got to pay your management. I mean, come on. I mean, not everyone has a nutritionist in the UFC, but like, it's like 50 grand comes down to 30 grand. It's like, okay, great. I just gave my life in the octagon, and now I'm getting 30 grand. Awesome. It's just crazy to me. These fighters are the top of the top. It's like the NFL of mixed martial arts is the UFC. And they're going to keep this huge roster of fighters. They need to take care of these guys, man. If it was up to me, I would come up with an arbitrary number that would be decided and voted upon. So say you fight 10 fights in the UFC, then your medical is covered in retirement with a pension plan. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's gotta be something, man. Because, like, these guys dedicate their lives to this shit, and then if they get fucking smoked and they're never the same, or a really bad injury and are never the same, then they're just fucked. So there needs to be a little protection for these guys in the long run after fighting, man. And, like, if Dana White is unwilling to compromise, what's going to happen is Francis Ngannou is going to go to the PFL. Derek Brunson just went to the PFL. I know they're not superstars. Shane Burgos. There's all these fighters that were in the UFC, and this is just the start, man. This is just the start. And they have to know with PFL buying Bellator, the competition is going to be a lot more. And if they're willing to pay fighters a lot more money, it's a no-brainer to just go fight for PFL. Especially with that Saudi money. They're going to have deep pockets to invest in some of these really big fighters that, like, once their contracts are up in the UFC, I don't know how that's going to work out for the UFC. Another topic I would like to discuss is the whole USADA chaos. Obviously, Dana White wanted Conor McGregor to fight sooner than USADA would let him by their bylaws, right? Dana White knows that the key to his cash cow is Conor McGregor. If you look at the pay-per-view numbers that aren't from Conor McGregor, they're not even close to McGregor's number. The UFC has yet to find that huge pay-per-view star that can even do 75-80% of what Conor McGregor has done in his pay-per-view fights. Now, do you think the fighters think that they are safer without USADA? The answer is undoubtedly no, they're not safer. If you think there's another organization or the UFC's internal organization is going to do better and be more fair and more objective than USADA, you are out of your mind. Dana wanted what he wanted, and USADA was in the way, so USADA got the boot. But I definitely think that these fighters are not safer without USADA. But I do think USADA did some things that I don't necessarily agree with, like showing up to people's houses at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of the night, the week of fights when they're cutting weight is absolutely ridiculous. They should have a little bit more of a consistent way they test people. And the people who live in different countries, like the Russians, they don't ever go there and test them as much as they were going and testing like Paulo Costa and all these other fighters. So that's unfair to fighters too. So I'm not the biggest fan of USADA, but I definitely think UFC and their fighters are more safe with USADA. But I also think that guys like Conor McGregor who have catastrophic injuries should be able to go out of the USADA pool or whoever's doing the testing and take, some steroids to get better when they have catastrophic injuries. I do think they need a test maybe 3 months before they go into an actual fight. 6 months is a long time to be tested over and over and over again. But I think 3 months work. I think there was some compromise to be had with USADA, but Dana White, again, didn't want to compromise. And now, who the hell is going to do this drug testing? And I know these fighters are not going to be as safe as they were when USADA was around, even though they might not have liked the way they worked most of the time. I think new leadership and a new voice could really benefit the UFC moving forward. So, who takes over for Dana White if he's no longer the UFC president? You need someone who's a good businessman, who's tough, someone who is no bullshit kind of guy, someone who can deal with the fighters and deal with everything that comes along with the fight game. It's a tough job, so you need someone tough to take over that position. And I think the perfect person is Daniel Cormier. I know a lot of people are going to give me shit and be like, oh, he's going to be biased towards the AKA guys. A lot of the guys that he's boys with and he trained with are on their way out of the UFC. Dana White's not going to leave anytime soon, right? Probably not within the next 5 years. But after that, DC is the guy for the job. He's a no bullshit guy. He likes to have fun, but when it comes to business, no one is tougher than Daniel Cormier. He doesn't take shit from anyone. He can deal with the fighters. He's not afraid to put fighters in their place and do what's best for the business. That's why I think Daniel Cormier is the perfect guy to take over as the UFC president. He's a lot more amiable, a lot more likable than Dana White, and he's not a pathological liar. So I like DC to take over for Dana White and fill that void. What do you guys think? You think DC could do the job? Let me know in the comments below. I think if we take Dana White out of the picture, the UFC will actually be a better product. I think fighters will get taken care of better, so they'll want to fight in the UFC still. With all these headwinds, I mean, I don't think the UFC needs Dana White. I think it would actually be better if he was gone. You can't argue with it. He's a great businessman. 100%. But at some point, you got to put your ego aside and compromise. And the one thing I think Dana White never takes into consideration is without these fighters, there is no UFC. You don't get to live in your mansions and you don't get to gamble $500,000 a fucking week in Vegas, man. You need these fighters, so you need to take care of them or they're going to walk. Mark my words, Francis already left. And look, that blew up in his face. He's got egg on his head, man. Francis Ngannou put on a great performance. Can you imagine if Dana just let him box? The UFC gets a cut of it. And now you have the guy who beat Tyson Fury fighting John Jones. You know how many pay-per-views that was? He's costing the company so much money right now, man. Thanks for tuning into the video, guys. Let me know in the comments below. I know this is a controversial subject, but I would love to hear your comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Peace.